Hello and welcome to this festive edition of Ways to Wellbeing, coming to you from Inverness, indeed just a hop, skip and a jump from mighty River Ness. And as we always try to do at this time of year, we want to send you into the festive season with a bit of a smile, maybe a laugh, maybe the odd guffaw or two if we're lucky. So for that reason, I'm delighted to welcome our first guest. She's one of Scotland's best loved comedians, loads of friends all over, well, Edinburgh really, but, Glasgow maybe as well, and hopefully Inverness too soon. She's Susan Morrison. She's probably best known to you as a comedian and a radio presenter, but also a history buff. And recently she's been able to combine her two passions of comedy and history for her historically funny shows, which over the festive season have become historically festive. So I believe she calls them a kind of knee-walking, sit-down tour of Scotland. So we're going to find out how that works. So Susan Morrison for It Is You. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. Oh, I'm not sure if I packed any guffaws, but I'll just check because I didn't know that was in the rider.
Well, you can always the guffaws if it doesn't work out, Okay, now you've called this, what is it, a sit-down, knee-walking tour of Scotland. Now we're all about promoting walking, so I think this interview should end before we begin, because if you're telling people to sit down and there's knee walking, what the heck are you doing on this podcast? Tell us about it.
Oh, is it time for me to do one of those politician pull the microphone off and strop off things?
Yes.
It's really a defence against Scotland's weather, because I love walking. Walking is absolutely brilliant, and I'm a huge advocate of it. And I mean, I can't actually function properly throughout the day unless I've had at least an hour, half an hour outside having a good walk. But as we all know, Jeff, Scotland's weather is a wee bit menopausal. Yeah. And you can never be absolutely sure what you're going to be facing when you go outside. So this is just a wee turn around Scotland's history. You can sit down in the warmth of the Stand Comedy Club with a wee drink in your hand and enjoy Scotland's pretty crazy history.
Yeah, so pretty crazy history, which you talk about quite a lot of the year. But for the festive season, you've found some kind of choice moments in our history to talk about. Is that right?
Well, yes, because of course everybody knows that we banned it. Like the Scots just went.
Well, we think everybody knows that.
Well, in 1640, the Kirk Sessions was massively Presbyterian. They've kind of they won the Reformation, so they're in charge, guys. And so they just go around and say, that's enough of this fun, and stop it. Bang. And as a result, Christmas is just another day in Scotland. For a very, very, very long time. In fact, the trial of William Burke, as in Birkenhead, actually begins at 10 o'clock on Christmas Eve, in the morning of Christmas Eve, and lasts right through the night until Christmas Day. And that's when he's found guilty on Christmas Day.
That sounds like one of those all-night Fringe shows,
Yes, it does. In fact, there's an idea. We could reenact that. That'd be brilliant. But Scottish trials just kept going. And
yeah.
His lawyer for the defence, Burke's lawyer, stood up to make his defence speech at 3:30 in the morning. What did he say? I don't know. I don't care.
Wearing a Christmas hat or something.
Go on, pull the cracker. Pull the cracker.
Guilty.
Pull the other one. It's a trap door.
Oh dear.
Do we have to cut that? But it's just a matter of the fact that Scotland just clamped down on it, which is why Hogmanay becomes huge in Scotland, and Christmas, which doesn't even become a public holiday until 1958 in Scotland.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
Now, in the show, you talk about one of our kings, and I like the sound of him.
James.
Was it James the Fourth?
Yeah.
I mean, he was a young guy with a lot of money and having a lot of fun, wasn't he?
He's my favourite Stuart King, actually.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he had a bad day at the office at Flawed, and I'll give you that. But I mean, he's fascinating. He's so interesting. He's so interested in absolutely everything. There's a guy who actually tries to fly from the battlements of Stirling Castle. He pays him to do it. It doesn't work. Let's not go there.
No.
But he spends, which is part of his problem. And he at Christmas one year, they have to expend a huge amount of money to move the court to Edinburgh, just to clean the rooms, get everything ready, right? The boss is coming. Everybody look sharp, look like you're doing something. And the records, his accounts are brilliantly kept, far more than many a politician or member of the House of Lords that I can think of today. Those accounts gives a tiny glimpse of pre-Reformation Christmas, how the Scots behaved, what they did. And he's very, very free with his money. And he has traditions at his court, such as the Lord of the Bean.
The Lord of the Bean, right.
The Lord of the Bean,
now,
yes.
I couldn't figure out what this was. It was either, I mean, it predates Heinz, 57 varieties. I'm thinking Sonny Bean doesn't sound very festive. You'll have to explain. The Lord of the Bean, tell us.
So everything at Christmas is upended. That's the whole point. Christmas is a time of revelry and mayhem and a bit of madness. So at a royal court, such as James's, the Lord of the Bean would be in charge of the festivities and the feasting. That's what he is. Mm-hmm. And he's always a lower member of the household who's been elevated for that little bit of time. Once it's his trumpeter, he gets to do the job. In fact, he gets to do it more than once. And his cook does it. His cook also becomes the abbot of unreason. Now, this is, again, everything gets turned upside down. Everybody goes mad. They had to make their own entertainment. So they do all kinds of crazy stuff. The abbot, for example, who is cook one year, hides a valuable silver vessel, and James has to pay a ransom to get it back. And everyone's going, ho, this must be fun. What la? And so everybody has a great time. Everybody eats. And you have no idea the food that people put away. It's unbelievable. The drink people put away. Phenomenal. On Christmas Eve, you would have the religious services. And everybody would go to that. Everybody would go to that. Christmas Day, bring out the party. And it would stay that way. Hogmanay is also a high point. And then on January the 6th, that's the first Monday in January, which is usually on the 6th, is the end of the festivities. That's when it stops. That's called Hansel Monday. So we know that we know about those traditions that existed before the Reformation. But then the Reformation comes along and just goes, stop it. They're all having too much fun. And so...
So tell us about, now, you talk about the daft days. Now, I only know this vaguely from a poem.
That's right, Robert Ferguson's poem.
Yes, and something about be careful with the whiskey or something. I got vague memories of it. That's about it, you know. Tell us about the daft days, because I think the daft days basically have continued in many ways.
Well, isn't that's the wonderful thing about the Scots. We've got this image in our head that the Scots were sternly, this is my sternly Presbyterian face, and I can only do it for a minute, so you have to watch. Okay, so they were really Presbyterian, really grim. Everybody fell in line with the Kirk, but we know they didn't, because fines are given out to people who are being, naughty. So there's five women in Inverness who get fined 5 shillings for singing filthy carols.
Yes, I know those people.
So do I. I've seen them on a night out. But they were in Dundee.
I also know Filthy Carol, but that's a different story.
And we all know how she came by that name. That was a Christmas party that went a bit awry, wasn't it? So the Scots are not, and then there are people who are doing card tricks. People get fined in Glasgow for drinking. No kidding. People get fined in Inverness for cross-dressing. Away you go. You figure that one out. I don't know.
Ahead of their time.
Totally ahead of the time.
Yeah.
And so these traditions, these things keep bubbling under the surface. And when Robert Ferguson writes The Daft Days in 1741, that's his first work in Scots. And he talks about, you're absolutely right, I've got it right here, because what you were talking about,
Yeah.
And his opening, to me, I mean, don't forget, Robert Ferguson was idolised by Robert Burns. And when you read this poem, and I would really urge for people to go and find it,
Yeah.
you find such a lively poem when he talks about, now, December's dowie face glowers o'er the rigs with sour grimace. That whole grimness
Yeah.
of December. And then all of a sudden, he talks about Merry Yule. Now, I'll come back to that in a minute. But he talks about Brewster wives now busky braw, fling your sorrows far awa. Let's party. And you're absolutely right. The last line is, and thou, great god of aqua vitae, what sways the empire of this city, when foo were sometimes capernocti, and be thou prepared to hedges for that black banditti, the city guard. So they go out. But what it proves is that despite the Reformation, despite John Knox and obviously Scotland's best beard wearer, 1641, and the traditions being slapped down, they bubbled under the surface. They stayed there all the time, and they started to come back out again. One really interesting detail about all the legislation about Christmas, there's loads of it. The Kirk never finishes. Stop that. And stop that. And whatever it is you're doing over there, stop that as well. I don't even know what that is, but you're not allowed to do it. Right? The word Christmas is rarely, if ever, mentioned. It's always Yule. That is the Scottish word, Yule. It's almost as if the Kirk couldn't bring themselves to say Christmas.
Interesting.
Always Yule. But it shows you that those traditions survived no matter what.
Now, as I say, you're good at finding humour in everything. Even for those that follow you on Facebook, and I'm luckily one of them. Even when you're going through some serious health issues, you were making us laugh as well. I mean, is that just a coping mechanism, or like
coping strategy? That coping strategy. Well, yes, no, I suppose. I don't think there's any other way to deal with things like this. I don't know any other way to deal with things like this. And I did find, so it was not just one cancer, but two. Because I don't do things by halves, Jeff. You know that. And sort of like buy one, get one free offer. Why not? In for a penny, in for a pound. Yeah. And then I had a massive battle with the NHS because I wanted to have a double mastectomy, and they didn't. Kept apologising, going, "Oh, we're sorry we put you under all this stress." It's like, no, I'm having a great time. I'm fighting with everybody. And things about cancer are actually inherently slightly bizarre. It's the way that everyone talks to you, especially women's cancers, breast cancers.
Yeah.
They always talk to you with that head at that exact 35-degree angle. Stop copying. Thank you very much. And then when I was then diagnosed as also having bowel cancer, so that proves that I go for it in a big way. And then I got thrown out for having salty language.
Salty language, what a great phrase.
She said, "We're not used to this kind of salty language." I went, "Sick." It's a hospital. I got, those drips, the chemo drips.
Yeah.
And you have to go to the toilet, so you have to take the drip with you. And this drip, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to use a phrase here, Jeff, but it's culturally relevant. This chemo drip was the bastard child of a shopping trolley, right? It just kept going everywhere. So I called it Boris, and I got stuck in the door with Boris, and I was quite salty. Salty.
Susan Morrison there. Now, a week or so ago, I found myself down at Doors on the shoreline of Loch Ness. It was one of those crisp December afternoons. The sun was shining and sinking nicely into the horizon, and the water was flat calm. But despite the low temperatures, there were people actually swimming in the loch. Now, these turned out to be members of an open water swimming group, and I thought it'd be interesting to find out more about them for this podcast. So the other day I went back to Loch Ness, and as you'll see, the conditions were just a wee bit different.
My name's Tracy Walsh. I live in Inverness, and I help to run the Inverness Open Water Swimming Group. not a club, it's open to anybody. We've got about 1,000 members over sort of Inverness and the wider Highland area as well. So it is open to anybody who's actually going to be swimming in this area. So, I mean, not everybody swims through the year, but there's quite a core group of us that swim all the way through the year. And sometimes if it's dark and it's wavy and it's not safe, then obviously we wouldn't swim. But generally we try and buddy up as much as we can to keep each other safe. So a day like this doesn't deter us, especially when you've got buddies with you. Everybody does it for a different reason. Certainly for myself, it was a way to get out of the house, something for myself. I just love being outside, and there's nothing like getting in there and then the exhilaration you feel when you actually come out afterwards. It's great for pain relief, all sorts of different things, but I think mental clarity is probably the biggest one for me. I'm not so keen on the word shock, but because I think, obviously you have to be very careful when you're doing cold water swimming, and everyone has very different tolerances as well. So, I kind of go in, and my colleague Tracy, she'll go in quite quickly, whereas other people need to take a little bit more time. And I think it's a very personal thing, and I think you've got to really listen to your body as well.
I used to swim every day. I still swim about 5 days a week now. I live abroad now, but when I'm back in Inverness, I swim every day. Abroad, I swim 5 days a week. Yeah. I like to keep it up. It's still cold over there, believe it or not. Personally, I've got a bad knee, and it helps my knee. The coldness, it does. I don't know exactly what it does to my knee, but because I'm a runner too, I can run for miles and not have my knee affected. When I don't swim, my knee gets sore, and that, I believe, is the water that helps it. It helps. I'm a laid back person, and sometimes I can get a bit angry, say with drivers or anything like that, and I'll just come for a dip. Even if I'm in for 2 minutes, I'll come out a much happier person, more calm, and for me that's it. It's all about calmness in my head, in the body.
Absolutely brilliant. Choppy, windy, cold, what makes you feel better for being on this earth?
My thanks to the members of the open water swimming group down there at Loch Ness. And yes, they did try to persuade me to join them in the water, but as I said to them, well, my camera equipment wasn't waterproof, and I'd forgot my trunks and many other excuses. Now, if you prefer indoor adventures, then you might consider joining our PFW Cheery Book Club. The club meets on the first Monday of every month usually, and we meet in the Waterfront Bar in Inverness. It's an in-person group, and we discuss all types of books in a cheery, friendly and non-judgmental way. And members also get the chance to come to our special author events that we stage throughout the year. The most recent of these involved Jo Caufield. Now, Jo's a comedian, and she's written this bittersweet book, very funny book, about her sister Annie. I say it's bittersweet because she lost her sister, and the book also deals with how Jo dealt with the grief of that loss. Now, here's a clip of Jo that we recorded at the Creative Academy here in Inverness.
It was a charity lunch, and I was to be the entertainer, a charity lunch, and it was in Knightsbridge, and it was lots of very posh ladies. It was all ladies, and I was sort of enjoying them because they were those very posh ladies, but they're nice posh ladies. They were all wearing, I thought, God, they're wearing such bright colours, really bright colours, and all their clothes were like that. But they looked like they'd bought them maybe 40 years ago. They're those sort of women, well, if you buy Jaeger, it lasts. I've never bought another coat ever. And they were all sort of having their wine, and the woman next to me reminded me of Princess Margaret. Not that I met Princess Margaret, but she had that sort of permatan, that same sort of helmet of hair. She was knocking back the white wine. She was very posh. But she also had this way of just opening stuff up, like just she'd say something, throw up a sentence, and like you could see a whole life in that sentence. And I remember her saying to me, she goes, but you know, I was really a terrible mother because bedtime was the same time as cocktail hour. She gave me that face like, because I loved cocktail hour. So I was never there at bedtime. And then she said, my son is such a lovely young man. I'm so lucky, he's completely forgiven me for being a terrible mother. And then she said he was in the Air Force. So I said, oh, my dad was in the Air Force. My brother then joined the Air Force. And her son had done tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. I said, oh, my brother did tours in Iraq. And then she said, oh, do you just have a brother? And I'd never been asked that question. And I didn't know what to say. And she could see she'd said something. Like tears sprang up immediately. And I said, I have a sister, but she's died, and I've never said that before. And she grabbed my hand, really quite rough, grabbed my hand and said, that's awful, that's absolutely awful. And she went, I don't have a sister, but I lost my best friend to cancer, and I know how you feel. And it was just that thing that I think happens over and over again with grief. If you grieve, it's like misery loves company. If you meet someone who has felt it, it makes you feel better. And in that moment, because I knew she knew how awful it was, it helped, which was a new thing to me to discover, like that the grief club with millions of people is a help. And then, what was so bizarre, so she's going, you know, that's terrible. And then at the corner of my eye is the opera singer Catherine Jenkins, who was the host, who was about to introduce me. And the Princess Margaret woman, and it was like she was like Judy Garland in a film or something. She then grabbed me like this, but you have to get it together. You've got to go on stage. And I was like, okay. But she was exactly the right person. And I will think of her forever, because she did sort of put me together again and go, it's okay. And also, you slightly worry that those situations are going to happen. And it never happened again. Or if it does happen, I just let it go. I didn't answer. Like weirdly, my neighbour's 6-year-old daughter, who's very nosy, and said to me, I've only got a brother, I'd like a sister. Do you have a sister? And I just said yes. I'm not going to say to her, yes, but she died. Life's terrible. You know? So I think it's that kind of, you know, humour is weirdly in everything in life, and it helps as well. And also, you know, my sister was funny, and she would hate to be boring as well. That was the other thing about cancer. She was like, oh, it's so boring, I don't want to talk about it. So wouldn't talk about it unless she found something funny about it. So she would, yeah.
Jo Caufield in fine form there. And profits from her book, The Funny Thing About Death, are going to the Macmillan Cancer Charity. Now, before we go, a few words about next year, because we're already at the moment planning for our next festival of walking and wheeling here in Inverness, and many of the groups who are taking part, many of our partners, have already gathered to thrash out some ideas for next year. And a wee reminder that, as ever, we're always looking for volunteers here at PFW, either as health walk leaders or minibus assistants or community transport drivers. Indeed, I'll leave you with some scenes from our Christmas party for the community transport volunteers. It was a fun afternoon of food and, banter as well, and well deserved. And so if you would like to be one of our volunteers next year, remember it's www.pfw.org.uk. And so, on behalf of all of us here at Partnerships for Wellbeing, all that remains for me to do is to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a happy and healthy New Year. And maybe we'll get a bit of snow going, and I think I need a hat for this as well. Yes, Suits me very well, I think. Ho ho! And again ho.
Ho, 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 ho! Merry Christmas!